on one side of the debate, we had someone we've talked about a lot before, a law professor by the name of Catherine McKinnon. What makes McKinnon very interesting is while she is also a philosopher, she is in many ways at least as much a practicing lawyer as she is a philosopher. And so, while she may advocate what are very obviously radical ideas, she also has experience, and the way she operates is moving through the real world and attempting to do things in a way that people who do not buy her philosophy, who happen to be judges, will accept. So what we've previously talked about in her work is how she basically, from whole cloth, came up with the idea that sexual harassment could be a form of sex discrimination, right? That if your boss either harasses you sexually or does what's called quid pro quo sexual harassment, meaning I will fire you if you do not do X. I will not give you the promotion unless you do X. She pioneered this as a theory of relief and a theory of discrimination for which you could get relief from a court. So what did Catherine McKinnon do for pornography? Well, she came up with a model anti-pornography civil rights ordinance. And you have a copy of that in the class materials, and that pornography ordinance attempted to leverage civil enforcement, meaning this was not criminal. This was ordinary people could bring lawsuits against pornography producers and use that incentive to kind of try to shape the world of what pornography looked like and what pornography got made, if pornography got made at all. The way she did that is by creating the statute that allowed for liability if people could prove causation in a particular way. Now, it is very much true that in some ways this notion that causation is easy to prove in this way is a little outdated. It certainly looks a lot like, as somebody who grew up playing a lot of video games in the 90s and early aughts, I am very familiar with the idea that causation can happen, or the argument that causation can be found between violent or other culturally frowned upon media and real world problems. But the basic idea of the law was, if you can draw this line between a particular piece of pornography and some harms that have happened in the real world, then this law is going to make it so that you can sue and you can recover and you can get all kinds of things that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get in terms of money. And theoretically, this would raise the risk and use kind of market forces to push certain kinds of pornography out of the public realm. On the other side, and this side ultimately ends up winning, is the idea that, well, hold on a second, this is speech. And in the United States, we have a whole lot of rules about what you can do to restrict speech. And so one of the things you can go and read that should be online is a case in which I believe it's the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals goes and says, hold on, this is not the way we do speech. And so ultimately, the end of this anti-pornography story is that these laws fall apart on First Amendment grounds, and First Amendment challenges to these laws are by the pornography producers are very successful. Now, one complication, and then I'll leave you guys to it. One thing that makes this a little bit more complicated is that there is this whole other story going on that has been part of the First Amendment jurisprudence for a long time, which is, what do we do with sex as speech? So there's another famous case. And if you'll give me a minute, I'm going to come up with it, the name of it. It's a famous case called Barnes versus Glenn Theater Incorporated from the Supreme Court. And Barnes versus Glenn Theater is about erotic and it's about stripping. And basically, Indiana had passed a law that said, if you are going to do adult dancing of any kind, you cannot have full nude dancing. You have to have at least pasties and a G-string. And the dancers sued the government that passed this, and the Supreme Court said, we don't think this is a meaningful restriction on speech. That is, we don't think that requiring pasties over nipples meaningfully changes the expression involved in nude or erotic dancing. So the question coming out of kind of these two worlds of cases that I want you to be thinking about is, what makes this dancing First Amendment ruling different from the anti-pornography First Amendment ruling? That is, if we believe the Supreme Court that requiring G-strings and pasties for nude dancing doesn't meaningfully restrict valuable speech, how is it that allowing liability for pornography that does cause harm in the world does meaningfully restrict speech? There are good answers to that question, but that's the question I want people asking. All right, thanks everyone.